Everyone watching on YouTube, let's jump right into this. We absolutely love having all the world's information right at our fingertips. But what happens when you're just too embarrassed to ask the right question? And what if that fear literally derails your entire educational future? Today's explainer is diving into a totally fascinating and honestly pretty heartbreaking hidden reality in adult education. We're going to break down exactly why so many adults struggle to finish their GEDs and how a totally new kind of artificial intelligence isn't just acting as a tutor, but actually as a quote-unquote shame eraser. All right, let's get into it.
Okay, picture this really basic question. What is a denominator? Now, I want you to put yourself in the shoes of a 34-year-old mom of two, sitting in this crowded adult education classroom. The teacher is flying through a math lesson, and it suddenly hits you. You've completely forgotten this super foundational concept. But you don't raise your hand. Why? Because the guy sitting right next to you might hear you ask it. Or think about a 28-year-old warehouse worker. You type this exact question into Google at like 11 p.m., but then you panic and delete it, because all of a sudden even a search engine feels like it's judging you. It's wild, but this is the silent, unspoken fear that is totally haunting adult education.
There's a quote from an expert that just hits the nail on the head here. They said, "The question is almost always basic, and the silence around it is almost always the reason people quit." Just think about how incredibly paralyzing that moment is. Admitting what you don't know out loud in front of an audience of other adults is absolutely terrifying, especially if you've already had a really rough track record with traditional school. It's like this giant, unscalable psychological wall. And get this, the scale of the fallout is just massive. 60%, almost 60% of adults who start a GED prep program drop out right when they hit the math phase. And here's the kicker, guys. It is not because they aren't smart enough to learn the math. Not at all. It's because the gap between what they actually remember from middle school and what the test asks for feels so huge. To cross that gap, you have to admit you don't know the basics. In a classroom, you have an audience watching you do that. And for 60% of people, that audience is enough to make them just pack up and walk away for good.
So what's the solution? Let's move to section 2. Enter the shame remover.
If the real villain here isn't the math itself, but the feeling of being watched while you learn it, how do we fix that? Well, this is where a brand new generation of AI-powered tools is stepping in. One education leader actually called this the shame remover. Tools like the Pinned AI Tutor, which was built by the AI Bridge Foundation, are built on one really simple, brilliant idea. The biggest barrier to a GED is shame. So take away the audience. Total privacy completely changes the game. It gives you this incredibly safe, private space where you can ask what a fraction is at midnight in total secrecy, and literally nobody in the world ever has to know you asked.
So how does this actually work in the real world? Well, the Pinned AI Tutor breaks things down into bite-sized sessions on one specific thing, like decimals. It uses the Socratic method, which just means it doesn't just hand you the answer, it asks you questions to guide you, and then it waits. But honestly, look at those last 2 points, zero judgment and mobile first. That's the secret sauce. The app doesn't sigh at you, it never rolls its eyes, it doesn't remember that you literally asked the same question yesterday, and since it's on your phone, you can do it in the break room at work or right after the kids finally go to sleep.
Which brings us to section 3, the numbers behind it.
Now, if you're naturally skeptical, which, hey, fair enough, you're probably wondering, does feeling safe actually help you pass a really hard test? The answer is yes. Early data from these AI prep platforms shows an average 3 percentage point jump in first attempt pass rates. Now, I know what you're thinking. A 3-point boost? Is that really a game changer? It sounds tiny, right? But hold on, because that 3-point average is actually a massive deal, and here's why.
Look at this massive 70% chunk right here. Over 70% of people who fail the GED their first time miss passing by fewer than 5 points. It's heartbreakingly close. So when an AI tool bumps your score up by 3 to 5 points, it is landing right in that critical make or break zone. That tiny little margin is literally the difference between grinding away for another exhausting year or finally getting that diploma and moving forward with your career.
But wait, because here is the stat that completely blew my mind. Let's talk retention. Traditional GED programs usually see only about 7% of new learners sticking around after the first week. 7%. But look over at the AI platforms, nearly 26%. Guys, that's almost a 4 times jump. This proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that removing shame physically stops people from giving up. It's the difference between a program that immediately bleeds students and one that actually keeps them locked in and learning.
And the rigorous science is totally backing this up. There was a 2024 study in the journal PLOS One with almost 300 participants. They found that the learning gains from AI-generated math hints were statistically indistinguishable from real human tutors. The time people spent studying was totally equal too. So the point isn't even that AI is a quote-unquote better teacher. It's that it teaches just as well. But the real superpower? You don't need an appointment. You don't sit on a waiting list. It's just there, ready to go, 24/7.
All right, let's look at Section 4, Rebuilding the Learning Loop.
So why exactly does this private, phone-based approach rewire adult learning so well? It's all about the hidden curriculum. People aren't logging in to ask super complex algebra questions. They're asking stuff like, wait, what does solve for X even mean? They're asking about the middle school math they totally forgot. Traditional prep courses usually skip right over that stuff because they have a rigid schedule to keep. But the AI, it'll happily sit there and explain it to you 50 times if it needs to.
And this is exactly how that Socratic loop works its magic. Step 1, you fail privately. You get it wrong, but the AI doesn't just hand you the right answer and move on. Step 2, you understand why. The AI patiently breaks the problem down into tiny, manageable pieces to see where your logic got tangled up. And step 3, you retry. Fail, understand why, retry. That's literally the biological foundation of how human beings learn anything. But it's exactly the process that public shame completely destroys.
Which leaves us with this really incredible thought. For adults who have spent years associating math with embarrassment, that privacy is not a feature. It is the entire product. When you can fail privately, without a room full of eyes staring at you, you don't close the app. You don't tell yourself, oh, I'll just try again next month. You finally feel safe, so you actually stick with the work.
Okay, moving to our final segment, Section 5, Reaching 19 Million Adults.
Let's zoom out for a second, because the scale we're talking about here is just staggering. When you look at how people actually access these prep materials, over 60% are doing it on their phones. They aren't sitting at a desktop in a quiet library. They are squeezing it in on the bus or on a lunch break. By early 2026, this app ecosystem was hitting record engagement, expanding into science and reading too. And it's working because it meets real people exactly where they are, on their phones, in those tiny 5-minute windows of their chaotic lives.
And why is it so absolutely crucial that we get this right? Because of this number right here, 19 million. There are 19 million adults in America right now who don't have a high school diploma. That's 19 million people who slip through the cracks of the traditional system, and they are basically waiting for this exact type of conversational, zero-pressure, shame-free learning. And thankfully, nonprofits are actively building these tools, giving them away for free to catch the exact folks that the old systems left behind.
So look, the debate over whether AI tutoring actually works for adults, that's over. The data says it absolutely does. But the real question, the one I want you guys to think about as we wrap up this explainer today, is this. What happens to 19 million people if these tools never reach them? Think about the massive societal cost if millions of adults go their whole lives never realizing that asking a quote-unquote stupid question is literally step 1 of learning. It's a huge thought. I'd love to hear your take on this, so definitely drop your thoughts in the YouTube comments below. Thanks so much for hanging out with me for this explainer, and I will catch you in the next one.